All right, so we're now being recorded. Let's start to share. And we're going to start with yes, we're going to start with what I've done with this metadata stuff. And so here we go. Metadata and emotions.
Okay, so your sound professor.
William, I don't have sound on? No? Okay, we'll start again like nothing ever happened. That'll be cut out of the, all right, I'm going to share sound. Take two. Ready, William?
Metadata and emotions. If you have a document stored on your computer, it is likely that the document's size in bytes is also stored there. The size in bytes is sometimes referred to as an element of the document's metadata. Here, we will investigate metadata within the context of preen theory. Ideally, this will reveal a deeper understanding of how preens impact behavior and carry out their evolution. Consider the Hamlet's soliloquy preen, our first cultural preen. As stated, it is stored in books, computers, and brains. Let's look at the metadata it acquires when stored in a computer. Let's assume that someone emailed the soliloquy to you in the form of a Word document, hs.doc, and you downloaded it. What metadata is associated with it? Well, since it was emailed, it is likely that the email address of the sender was available, perhaps that will be stored as metadata associated with the document. The document had some of its own metadata already attached. For example, its name hs.doc. If you happen to be running a Windows operating system, and you later decide to open hs.doc, that piece of metadata would cause the document to be sent to a program, likely Microsoft Word, that would process it, and present it to you in some readable form. On the other hand, if the document sent was hs.pages, Apple products use a word processor called Pages, then you might not be able to open it at all, and it will likely have little chance of reproducing from your computer to other Windows machines. The point is that the metadata associated with a copy of the HSP has a great deal to do with its prospects of being reproduced.
Okay, so one question is, it is true that Apple uses a word processor called Pages.
Yes, but I think people don't generally use it.
Oh, okay. Thanks, Ryan. But it exists, and it has a extension .pages. Is that also correct?
I think it just uses .txt. I don't know if it has a special format.
Oh, okay. So, what other? Well, that complicates things.
You could try using like Windows versus not Windows specific like compression algorithms. Like I think Windows has its own like Windows flavored compression, if I remember correctly.
Okay, so what should I write if I want to be accurate here?
I think this is basically correct. There's an app called Pages, and I think the extension is Pages.
Oh, okay. So we've heard it from Dr. Biebel, so I'm going to stick with this. All right. Okay, so
Sorry, Professor, sorry to interrupt. I created an untitled document in Pages here, and it seems it saves it as dot, just like you wrote it.
dot what? Wait.
Dot Pages, just like you wrote it. So it's, and if few people.
Catcher, please mute.
Sorry about that.
No problem. Go on, John.
No, if few people use the Pages application, it serves the point quite well.
Okay. All right. So fine. Thank you for clarifying that, guys. On the other hand, if the document, all right, so let's just pick up here.
On the other hand, if the document sent was hs.pages, Apple products use a word processor called Pages, then you might not be able to open it at all, and it will likely have little chance of reproducing from your computer to other Windows machines. The point is that the metadata associated with a copy of the HSP has a great deal to do with its prospects of being reproduced.
Okay, so that is the point, right? That we're talking about the Hamlet soliloquy preen, and it gets stored in computers, as we had said earlier. But getting stored in a computer is one thing, but there's all this metadata that gets associated with it, including its name. And if, for example, it has a name like HS Pages and it happens to be inside of a Windows computer, it's probably not going to spread very far from that computer. It's as if a virus infected something, but that something wasn't connected to very much other uh, organisms that where the virus could spread. So this metadata has a lot to do with the prospects of the preen increasing its copying numbers.
Now let's consider a copy of the Hamlet soliloquy preen stored in a human brain. Does it have metadata? Yes, it does. For example, let's assume that you were taught the Hamlet soliloquy preen in school. You may have...
By the way, since you guys couldn't have read this since I just wrote it since our last meeting, do you if I could have inserted a question here, what metadata got stored when you learned the Hamlet soliloquy preen?
Its author.
Yes, right? You didn't just learn that preen, you also picked up that it was written by William Shakespeare. And you even picked up that this thing was called the Hamlet soliloquy preen. Well, they wouldn't have said that. You would have picked up that it had a name, Hamlet soliloquy, right? That's metadata you picked up when you learned the preen itself. Okay. So,
For example, let's assume that you were taught the Hamlet soliloquy preen in school. You may have also been taught that it was called Hamlet soliloquy and that it had been written by William Shakespeare. These are metadata that will be associated with your Hamlet soliloquy meme. But it is likely that you acquired other metadata of a more subtle type. For example, metadata that associated positive qualities such as great or deep. On the other hand, had you attended a Christian school and been taught what might be called the Marx cultural preen, religion is the opiate of the people, I suspect that the metadata associated with your Marx cultural meme would be less desirable.
Professor,
right. Yes.
I had a thought where if you go back to the page that we were just on,
Yeah.
especially it's talking about like let's say you read Hamlet and you like it changed everything for you and you were like, oh my gosh, this like really revolutionized everything for me. I feel like that can tie into the PESD that we were talking about earlier, which would in turn form like, you know, crucial memories. Like, and my sister's actually, you know, in the thing today, and I have like memories of like reading and like watching things with her. And like, you know, we loved watching certain shows together, but almost like those shows mean much more to me because I have those memories with her also. So I'm able to store not only the preens of that, but also the memes of the experience too.
Yeah, I understand, Jason. By the way, that actually did happen to me.
Hmm.
Okay. Did I describe this earlier? That when I was in high school, I was taking a course from this English teacher, and it was my first exposure to Shakespeare. And I believe we started with Hamlet's soliloquy or, some part of that. Did I describe this to you guys earlier?
No.
Okay, thank you. So that actually happened to me. So I was in high school, and I mean, this is to some extent an aside, well, to a large extent, just an aside, but and I took the next English class, and the English class was taught by this really good teacher, and we got into Shakespeare and Hamlet and Hamlet's soliloquy. And it was the first time in my life that I saw that reading things wasn't just like reading the sports section or a comic book, that there could be information below just the words on the text and the
Hmm.
actions that were taken. So I did have the experience that it had a much more, it was sort of like uh, a pivotal preen for me. Um, and by the way, just to go a little further, the English teacher called me over one day when class ended and said to me, Leonard, what are you going to do when you graduate high school? And I said, I don't know. And she said, have you thought about going to college? And I said, well, yeah, I don't know. I'll probably go to City College where my brother had gone to, older brother had gone to after he graduated from high school. And she said, why don't you go to Berkeley instead? And I said, okay. And that was one of those crossroads moments in my
Hmm.
life, right? So yes, it was sort of, in some ways, a pivotal preen for me.
That's really cool. That also
Yeah.
kind of that makes me think of well, we were talking about somebody mentioned, I think if nostalgia was similar to PESD also a couple
Yeah,
lectures
that
back, which
I
I don't quite agree with also, but that was making me think of nostalgia in terms of this sense too, where if like some people like look back on like the like 70s, like very fondly, probably being like, wow, like it was so fun and free and so different. And now like things are like a lot tougher now, and we had so much more culture back then. But then if somebody like goes and throws on their bell-bottom jeans that they had from the 70s and they look at themselves, they'll probably be like, oh gosh, like, what were we thinking? So it's kind
yeah.
of funny how some of those like memories exist just based off of more the association of a lot of that stuff, or like through the exposure of a lot of different cultures back then. But then I don't know if they necessarily hold up also to like
Well,
continue being like powerful.
uh, well, they do if they're very, we sort of discussed this. If they sort of apparently send the constellation of for perhaps its brain chemicals way off of the normal chart, then you may remember them they'll get recorded by the meme recorder, and you may and they'll probably be given a high priority, and you will return to those things time and time again uh, in your thinking and your planning for the future. Uh, Joe? Okay. Well, anyway, uh, yes. So to that extent, because you recount these things, these important events in your life frequently in the future, I guess at some point it can look like nostalgia to you because you're returning to old events and reflecting on them. Yeah, I now see the connection better. Okay, but all right. So where were we on this stuff? Okay, but we had gotten to the point where we said this, or we being me.
For example, metadata that associated positive qualities such as great or deep.
So the thing is that you not only pick up this metadata that is, it's called Hamlet's Soliloquy, and it was written by William Shakespeare. You also pick up sort of value uh, judgments about the Hamlet Soliloquy. Like you probably learned it was a great work of art, and you probably learned it was quite deep, that kind of thing. And so then the other side of the coin is if you have picked up something.
On the other hand, had you attended a Christian school and been taught what might be called the Marx cultural preen, religion is the opiate of the people, I suspect that the metadata associated with your Marx cultural meme would be less desirable.
Right. So if you're in a Christian school and you read that, you're going to pick up metadata, I'm guessing, that says, this is false, this is dangerous, etc. Okay. And then this is
What is perhaps more interesting is that in humans the metadata associated with a meme appears to also include emotions. Here is a simple example. Consider Donald Trump and Kamala Harris. When it became clear that they would be the presidential nominees of their respective parties, each party began using its instruments, often in the form of money for advertising, to attach new negative emotional metadata to the memes associated with the opposition candidate. This emotional metadata appears to have had its desired effect, as one can readily see when members of the two parties engage in a discussion of politics. I suspect that for many people, if the opposing candidate appeared on their TV, the unpleasant emotions they experience are sufficiently powerful that, to stop them, the person will take precipitous action to switch to another channel.
okay. So does this seem to be what your experience is that well, I assume you recognize that there's a lot of emotions involved when people of opposite parties engage in a discussion of politics, correct? Or anybody think it's not correct? Okay. But so what's being described here is that in particular, one society or another society can use this metadata to evoke emotions in people. That is, this metadata is not static. And people actually feel, hatred or love or whatever emotion you want. But they don't feel that from some intrinsic dislike or approval of one candidate or the other. It is a learned phenomena. And even the emotions are learned and can be implanted as metadata in your brain. So I'd like a little bit of a discussion of this. And I certainly invite Jason, your sister's Justine?
Yeah, Justine.
Yes.
Oh, okay. And so, Justine, feel free to give, an opinion where if you do, you will be representing the entire discipline of psychology.
And all the Johnson year checks.
I was going to chime in because this is extremely similar to my honors thesis that I did in my undergrad. And it was like just after COVID-19. I went to university during COVID, and I had participants write about the first month of COVID-19 in university, which was pretty negative emotion for most college students at the time.
Sure.
And then, so they journaled about it. So it's their memory of that time. And then we had them split into groups, but some of them were told to write only positive things that happened. So they had to really find like the silver lining of COVID. Like maybe they spent more time with their family, maybe they got outside more, anything like that over like an objectively negative event. And then we tested their emotion after, and the people that wrote positive things about COVID had a significantly more positive emotion with the first month of COVID-19 than the people who just wrote normal things. So that's very relevant to emotions and memories.
Right. Now, I want to explore that further because, okay, so these people had some experiences in their life and involving COVID or the ramifications of COVID. And then you ask them to describe positive results of that experience or negative results of that experience. And so what would they have done when asked to do so? Okay. Yeah, it's interesting. Go ahead.
Yeah, so they wrote, so half of them wrote a journal entry of 500 words, and they were told to write focusing on the positive things that happened.
Yes.
And so it's a significant journal entry of what they had to write. And then the other half were just told to write about what happened. So there was no focus on emotion, positive or negative. Yeah. So, but then when we did assess those later, we used the Luke assessment tool, which is language something, I don't remember. But the ones that were told to write just about the experience, so there was no focus on emotion, but they were tended to be more negative just because the event itself was a negative event. But then the ones that were told to be positive were obviously more positive. And then later on an assessment after that, we assessed the emotion that they associated with the event. And the ones that wrote positively had a more positive emotion with that memory.
Yeah. So I'd like to understand, I'd like to be able to interpret this study you did in terms of this preen theory that I'm going to develop. And so I want to well, I'm going to say something soon about emotions, which I think is maybe a bit surprising. And I want to see how it fits in with your study, and I want your opinion of it. But let's move on for now, and we're going to come back to it. So this idea that people okay, so particularly because apparently in your study, the people who were to write the positive things that happened, those people presumably had memories of things which included the positive emotion. That is
right.
Okay. And so I would say that positive emotion was sort of metadata on the event that they were experiencing.
Yes, I would think so. I didn't know the exact terminology from the course, but yeah, that would make sense.
Okay. And so I get that, but I'm curious about the fact that they had memories of events. I think you gave an example of visiting family or something, or
Yeah.
spending more time with their family.
Mhm.
And that had emotions associated with it. And I'm wondering how the emotions got associated with their spending more time. So let me go on, and then we're going to get to a speculation I have, and I want to see how it fits in with your experience.
This emotional metadata appears to have had its desired effect, as one can readily see when members of the two parties engage in a discussion of politics. I suspect that for many people, if the opposing candidate appeared on their TV, the unpleasant emotions they experience are sufficiently powerful that, to stop them, the person will take precipitous action to switch to another channel. To put this in a larger context, consider reward/punishment systems. Long ago, genetic preens began using such systems to control the behavior of their organisms. Typically, in humans, the rewards are physical pleasures, and the punishments are physical discomforts.
So, let's take humans, for example. You get physical pleasure when you engage in some behaviors that the genes have deemed good behaviors. And you get physical punishments, discomfort, when you engage in activities which your genes have don't want you to behave in. So obviously, some of those rewards, the physical pleasures, are sexual pleasures. Some of the punishments are pain, yes, and they're put in place. And then when you go walk around the world, you spend considerable time avoiding unpleasant, avoiding unpleasant physical discomforts and seeking out physical pleasures. Yes. And that serves the genes because you end up doing the things largely that they want you to do. And you avoid the things they don't want you to do.
I don't want to make this an entire advertisement for my sister, but she actually, because in Korea you did the addiction research, right? And it wasn't just like drug addiction, it was also like masturbation and like cyber pornography
Yes.
and like all these like very relevant.
Right. So yes. So I assume at least that statement. Maybe I shouldn't assume. You basically agree with me, Justin, that these things, physical pain and physical pleasure, are, things that we're genetically endowed with, and they're there because the genes want us to do certain things and don't want us to do certain things.
Yes,
Is that?
definitely. Like seeking rewards or pleasant,
Yeah.
pleasant things versus avoiding negative discomforts. Yeah.
Yes, and by the way, since you were addiction, uh, drug addiction, uh, I assume that when people say shoot heroin uh, for the first time, they get they like it a lot. They get a lot of physical
Mhm.
pleasure out of it, and that uh, once that happens, they will organize perhaps a large part of their lives seeking out, designing their behavior to
Mhm.
best allow them to find more.
Yeah, that is what a large part of like assessing and diagnoses is for substance use addiction, is asking the questions like, have you spent significant time seeking out the drug, taking the drug, recovering from the drug? And then if it's a yes, then you move on to the next one. And it's like, have you had to take more of the drug in order to have the same effects as before. And then, so it's all those kind of questions that are,
Yes,
yeah.
makes sense. I'm going to be interested in knowing later how you treat people with addictions. Like, you know, let's say somebody decides they'd rather not be on heroin the rest of their lives. And I want to know what tools you have to
Yeah, how to
help.
turn it around.
Yeah. So, but there's so much to talk about. Let's stay on this one. Okay. So now I'm going to make a sort of this claim.
It is worth considering the possibility that emotions evolved specifically to provide a reward/punishment system that would allow memes, and therefore brains, to control human behavior.
Okay. So I'm positing here that just like humans and many organisms have these reward punishment systems that are used to control the organism's behavior, that once we develop brains and we allowed them to share control of our behavior, the genes allowed the brains to start to control some of our behavior as well. They needed a reward punishment system similar to the physical pain and pleasure ones, so that they could control human behavior, and that reward punishment system may be the emotions. That is, our brains can control some of our behavior, and when we act in a way that the stuff stored in our brains likes, then we get emotional rewards, positive emotional feelings. And when we behave otherwise, we get negative emotional feelings. So this is just a reward punishment system that arose once we got sophisticated brains. So that may be, according to what I'm suggesting we consider, the origin of emotions. Okay. And then I guess this is even more speculative, but
Further, I suspect that we are born with a repertoire of emotions.
so, oh, well, let me go on a little further.
This repertoire gives rise to the entire scope of emotions that we can ever feel.
So we feel certain emotions. And by the way, we have very cumbersome language to describe the emotions we're feeling. I think, as someone, perhaps Jason, had pointed out, other languages have more refined notions of what their feelings that they can express. But it's very difficult to put into words your emotional state. We just approximate it, I think. Okay, but what emotions we can feel are not unlimited. They're defined by some repertoire of emotions that we have at birth. Okay. This might be likened to we have some repertoire of physical behavior we can execute because of the muscles and everything we were given at birth. So I used this earlier. So the example is even if you think you can fly, you can't. Your repertoire was defined at birth of the physical things that it's possible for you to do. And I suspect that there's a repertoire of emotions that are defined at birth that give you the scope of possible feelings you can have. All right. So then to go further.
But, at birth, these emotions are not associated with memes, events, or anything else. They only become associated with things through mechanisms like metadata.
Okay, so I'm positing here that you have this emotional repertoire, but it has no target. That is, when you feel happy, what events make you happy, what events make you sad, uh, is to be determined at your birth. There's nothing that will make you happy or make you sad at your birth. That is to say, it only gets associated with events or people and things after you're born. It's just a repertoire when you're born. Okay, so do any of, yeah, John, please.
Yeah, quick question. So it seems like one of the core principles in preen theory is that it is a successful strategy for preens to program their own mutations and variations, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so my question would be, these points about having emotions to be able to control behavior, can we see these as sort of contributors to this overall strategy of preens controlling their own mutations?
Yeah, I do. So here's what I see.
Sort of, sorry, it's just sort of like lemmas that lead to a theorem, like intermediate results that help. The overarching result would be preens controlling their own mutations or their own variations.
Oh, I think it's rather, I see it as preens attempting to survive. And they do need strategies to successfully mutate, and they do need strategies to successfully reproduce, increase copiness. But I think the primary thing is their survival, and that means so that's the way I view it. But okay, so where was I going with this? Okay, so I'm claiming that there's no event that would make us happy or sad that comes intrinsically at our birth. So, can anybody think of a counterexample to that? That is, so let's take spending time with your family. And of course, that can create positive and negative emotions. But if it's a particularly nice day and everything, it can be wonderfully positive. We feel very happy about it. Okay, so now, while I believe that many people share in common the idea that when there were times they spent with their families that they felt happy. I believe that. But just like this Descartes things, if I took the people that you feel happy with and and called your family, uh, if if I told you you were adopted, you still would have felt happy, even though these weren't your genetic parents, right? Because you didn't know that. It wouldn't have changed anything. So, yes, you might have the potential to have happiness when you spend time with your family, but at your birth, the family is just a bunch of circles which later get filled in with particular people. So there's just this template of you'll feel happy when you're with your family. but it's not specific to any family. It's just sort of a template that sits there and gets filled in. Does that even make any sense to you guys? Okay, catcher.
Yeah, I was just wondering, have you thought about this from like a neurobiology perspective? Because like first you when you said there's like a limited range of emotions, I was thinking of like a parameter space with like n number of dimensions and you can't go outside of that, right? And then I thought about the
Yeah,
brain,
that's a good way.
which has n number of, possible neuronal circuits, and you can't, there's only so many pathways you can form new emotions through. Um, and then you were talking about from birth, and then you're associating I mean, from I don't really have a super good understanding of neurobiology, but from my understanding, you form memories, and then uh, you recall these memories, and as you recall them, they're associated with emotions, and that seems pretty similar to what you're saying from like a preen level. So I was just wondering if you really considered that, and or like is that just what is happening and it's not anything?
Well, the answer is I haven't looked in that direction very hard, but this discussion itself is allowing me to clarify my own view of things. And so the basic thesis is we have this repertoire of emotions, and we have but they are just a collection, and they have no association with any events or people. We may have sort of, I guess, what might be called emotional schemas built in. That is, these are these things that I'm describing as, uh, you know, family, except that there's no particular members there. I think one sort of thing like that that might focus this better is when a baby is born. I think we can look at it and say it appears as if it has some emotions, right? It can be happy and it can be unhappy. It may have a limited repertoire of emotions that it expresses when it's born, right? But those are clearly there. However, I think that that may be one of these schemas because you are not happy because you're with your mother, your biological mother. You're happy with the first person who comes along and feeds you and takes care of you, and it doesn't matter whether you're adopted or not. That face can go into the, and then you feel happy or sad when that person expresses approval or disapproval and stuff like that. Okay, so okay, Ryan, please.
I offer, I guess, another mathematical model of this.
Yeah, yeah,
So you've now discussed this theory twice, and both times the thought that came to my head was when you are born, start with a set of source nodes, one for each emotion that you are capable of, and
yes,
then throughout your life, you are allocating new nodes, and the edges that are basically the things that I guess the edges are relationships to existing memes. And then sort of the emotions that you feel would be like the flow from all of the different emotions through your like emotion graph.
yeah.
I guess the capacities would
I,
be related to like the strength of the connection or something. I don't know.
yes, I get it. And you could try a graph theoretic modeling of this as some kind of network. And I do think that there are these sort of nodes which are is one for each element of your emotional repertoire. And then there are combinations of those things, and probably weighted combinations, which you interpret as disappointment, whereas a different weighted a combination you interpret it as depression or anxiety or whatever it is whatever word you ascribe to these things. And and but then on top of that, I think that it's still the case that when your combination of that we call, for example, disappointment, it has no target. It just has these kind of schemas, and you will feel disappointment when you fell in. Mumble, mumble, mumble.
I guess I was seeing the target as whatever experience that comes in, and then the flow through the graph would tell you how to feel for that particular input or something. I don't know.
Yeah.
The target is hard to define.
Yeah, but well, like on the mother thing, a baby has some combination, we assume, of emotions that lead to crying in a distressed way, and some combination of emotions that, end up manifesting themselves as smiling and laughing. So those are part of the repertoire that a baby can express and presumably feel, but it is not directed at any particular source. There may be a position, like for example, and I mean, this idea that ducks undergo something called impression. So apparently, when a duck's eggs hatch, those baby ducks will latch on to the first large, correct size object that's moving around. Now, typically, that's its genetic parent. Yes. And you'll see that the parent will walk across a road and all the baby ducks will follow in a line, right? That's called impression. But you can exploit this behavior in baby ducks because once the eggs hatch, you make sure that the mother duck isn't around, and you walk by these baby ducks, you, a human. And these baby ducks will impress upon you, okay? And they will start following you everywhere you go. And if you've ever seen these amazing videos of flying ducks close up, how do you get this photograph, right? Well, the answer is, in some cases at least, that some photographer has caused a lot of baby ducks to impress upon them. And then the photographer gets, I've seen it done this way, gets a glider, and the baby ducks have grown up now. And so he flies in the glider and they fly right next to him just because they've impressed upon him. And you can get these great, incredible images of flying ducks. So I'm suggesting that those baby ducks would impress upon anybody. They don't have a particular thing to impress upon. They have the emotional repertoire, but they only, impress upon the first thing that comes along that colors in what the actual thing is, the mother. Mumble, okay, so it is certainly a mumble. But okay, let's take a 10-minute break. 3:05. Yes? Okay, good. Then I will see you guys then. Hello.
Hello.
Hello. Hi, Isabel. Yes, so we're back. And I thought a little bit more about how to model what I'm mumbling about here, about the repertoire and the schema. So it seems to me, or it doesn't seem to me, but let me hypothesize this view of it, that when events happen, hang on a second. When events happen, uh, that there's a process that takes place. And this is probably largely a genetically endowed process. And that event uh, will be judged on will be processed, and your physical behavior in the while that event is happening will then be put together. That is, you have a physical behavioral repertoire that you're born with. And when an event happens, there is a judgment made on whether to uh, invoke various your physical behavioral repertoire. So, for example, if the event is some large object is coming at you at high speed, you apparently have built in this notion that, or this program that says, oh, then invoke the following muscles in the following order, which will cause you to run out of the way of this large object. And in the same way, that event will be processed so as to, emotionally, that is, that event, feel this way about that event. And that may cause certain aspects of your emotional repertoire to become activated, and you'll have certain feelings. Okay. And so that may be sort of built in, but the events that are going to happen and what they'll invoke, both physically and emotionally, is a judgment made after you experience the world, right? The repertoire is there physically, the repertoire is there emotionally, but every event may connect different aspects. How does that one work? Okay. John, please.
Um, I think perhaps having the exact programmed physical behavior wouldn't exactly work because children, like babies, they don't know how to move, and they still have to create like this internal model of their body, and this is my hand, and I can grab stuff and I can wave, and then they seem to be building the internal representation of their own bodies before they can actually do the moving and the physical behaving. So maybe, I don't know, one hypothesis would be that what needs to be built in is this capacity to learn. I don't know, that would seem more plausible when thinking about it this way.
Okay, I get it, John, and you may be right. Let me make a remark that suggests, I mean, what you brought up is that our reaction in my, you know, what um, ontology, I guess, what you have brought up is that our reactions to events changes as we grow, and I hadn't considered that. However, let me ask you this question. I've thought about this. Maybe you have, maybe you haven't. Why is it that babies don't walk until they're 11 months old, ballpark? Why is that?
So I read somewhere that the child's infancy is the longest lasting infancy among, I guess, all species, because basically because of our brains. So when we became able to walk on 2 feet, then our how do you say this pelvic bone significantly got thinner, and so this meant that to reduce the risk of mothers dying when giving birth, the babies had to be born before their brains were fully developed, as opposed to like horses, right? Horses, they are born and they get up within a few minutes because they already have their developed brains. So we still need a long period to develop our brains before we are in this equivalent maturity stage as other species. So, and the explanation would be linked to this with us being able to walk in 2 feet. I don't know if I made myself clear, but
No, you made yourself perfectly clear, and I've heard that explanation as well. And I think it's the standard explanation that we all are taught. But as you point out, a horse can get up and start walking within hours of being born, probably less than hours. And but human babies can't. But I would suggest that there's another possible way of viewing that. The reason horses walk as soon as they're born is they're living in an area where they're prey, and they're prey of, obviously predators. And if you don't walk, you're probably not going to survive. You got to walk fast. Many of these plains animals are constantly on the move, and you don't walk, you're not going to be alive. So it's just, genes made it sure that those babies could walk. Now, on the other hand, genes made sure babies didn't walk too soon. And it could be because, like the following. Let's say a baby could walk around. John, you've had babies and stuff. You want them when they're like 2 weeks old, walking around your house exploring stuff,
not at all.
like the light socket and all of that stuff.
Right.
No, you don't want that to happen, right? Okay. And I don't think it's so much that they haven't necessarily that their brains need to develop or stuff like that, though that could certainly be the case. They just also need to learn about the world they live in enough so that they can walk around and not end up creating a disaster. So that's an alternative view of this walking issue. Yes?
Yes, that makes sense, and it's completely consistent with brain theory.
Yes, and I don't think it's the same view of things that you just elucidated, and which I, of course, have heard, and I assume many of us have heard. All right, Justine.
Hi, yes, I was thinking more about the repertoire of emotions that you mentioned too. And I suspect that you were saying that babies have a very limited repertoire of emotions, or pretty basic, instinctual, maybe emotions, which I was also thinking could be due to the language they know. Like, you're not going to teach a 1-year-old what the word nostalgia means. They're going to learn happy, sad, angry first. Um, and then I was wondering how that changes, like, as you get older and into adulthood and you learn about all the emotions. I remember reading or learning somewhere that your temperament stabilizes at a certain age, and it's relatively young that your temperament, so how calm or active or everything you are, is pretty stable from, I think, your teens. Um, which doesn't mean people can still learn to manage their emotions in different ways, but that overall stability typically remains the same. And then I was thinking on how that works with people that go on medications to manage emotions, that would change them, like, biologically on depressants or stimulants. Or so I was just thinking how adjustable that repertoire is, and like what could be added, taken away as you grow older.
Is that where I
Those are
should
good.
jump in, Justine, when we're talking about antidepressants? This is
Huh?
my expertise. Should I jump in when we're talking about antidepressants for my expertise?
Maybe.
Tag it over me.
Uh,
I I feel like that's a good point where it's kind of interesting, especially in countries like my sister lived in Korea for a while, and like some countries like that do not believe in medication.
I missed a word, Jason. Lived where?
In Korea,
Okay, yes, go on.
yeah,
Mhm.
and some other countries don't believe in medication per se, which could definitely affect some of their systems that they're growing up with, especially as things kind of become increasingly more difficult to um, kind of manage, is where kind of medication comes into play.
Well, uh, I have thought a lot about these things, medications in particular,
Yeah.
and uh, and it's certainly a discussion that I would like to have with Justine.
Mhm.
But Justine, uh, you got other friends who are psychologists?
Yes.
Okay. Uh, have them join if they want to, okay? Because I would not mind at all. In fact, it would really help me to have a group of psychologists and discuss what Preen theory leads me to think about psychology and what you practitioners of psychology believe is going on.
If we
Yeah.
were in Los Angeles, her and her friends could grab a drink with you. But I'm in Seattle, and then my
Yeah, well,
sister's in North Carolina. But
well, yes. Thank you for the offer, but you know, it's coming too late. All right.
yeah,
So yes, but yeah, if that I would really enjoy and think it is very educational. And I have thought a lot about what therapeutic approaches
Hmm.
are possible, and uh, there there's what I'll just break it into two big chunks: talk therapy versus invasive therapy,
Hmm.
by which I mean surgeries or drugs. And I think they can only play certain roles and uh, in treatment. And our use of drugs, for example, SSRIs, serotonin specific reuptake inhibitor. I forget what it is. You may know.
I think that's right.
Oh, okay. Uh, those drugs have some problems. They may, anyway, it's a discussion I would really enjoy. See if you can round up a group of
Yeah,
psychologists.
it was getting
And
my head spinning from that perspective too, on therapists that work specifically with managing emotions and addressing emotions and how that changes.
exactly. Yes. And okay. So let's discuss that, or please look into that, of getting a repertoire of psychologists or
Yeah, I could
psychiatrists.
see.
Okay, thank you. Okay, all right, so going a little further on the paper here.
Finally, metadata seems to have something to do with the emergence of language. Perhaps as a child you learned about oranges when a parent held up an orange and said the word orange to you. That utterance would become metadata on your orange meme. Of course, if you were Spanish, the metadata attached to your orange meme would be the utterance naranja.
Okay, so um, this our we learn language in this way. For example, we learn the word orange in this country and naranja in Spanish for the same memes. Yes, it's the orange meme, but the metadata includes the utterance to make associated with the orange gene. And that's different in different societies, the metadata that's attached to it. So obviously language is a very complicated thing to consider, but I just a remark on it. William,
Uh, Going back to what you said about emotions,
yes.
uh, are you sure they don't have any connection initially to memes? Because, to give an extreme example, take horses. We don't have as much of a preference for grass as horses do, and we don't have and for birds, we don't have as much of a fear. I mean, we fear heights more than they do, of course.
Yeah, well, yeah, I assume so. Yes.
So I assume that many of these things are also genetically intertwined,
Yeah, but uh, that, as we've said earlier, fear is the same word used for what I think are two different phenomena. Uh, it's different to fear getting run over by a bus. You know, if one's getting close to you, you might have fear. But that's different than the fear you're going to fail this course. And the first one, I don't think of as an emotion that you're experiencing. But the second one, I do think of as an emotion, but we use the word fear for both. So I think it's confusing. But yes, but I'm not sure if that addressed William, but there's more to your question than just that, right? Uh, can you reiterate or expand on what you were saying?
What I mean is, it seems that for food, for example, we tend to like certain foods other animals don't like, and it seems to
Oh,
be right.
yes. Yes, we do. We do. Uh, but I don't think that's emotion. And it's not an emotional issue. We do, and actually I address that in Darwin Turning Dawkins. I address the difference in this case, what dogs like to eat and what humans like to eat. And it's an important area of all this. Okay. Here's another example I think that is maybe interesting. Mourning. as in mourning the death of. Okay, that is an emotion. It's some combination of our emotional repertoire put together, and we call it mourning. Okay, now many people might think that it's intrinsic in us to mourn the death of people. And we certainly mourn the death of people who are nice to us, okay? But as Mark Twain once said, I've never killed anybody, but I must admit that I have read the obituaries with a certain degree of satisfaction. Okay, so yes, we don't mourn the death of people. We mourn the death of people who fit the template of people that were important to us, we had a connection to. But if they're the enemy, how many people, well, and don't answer this, how many people mourn the death of Osama bin Laden in this country? I mean, I will admit I did not mourn his death. Okay. So that is not, mourning is not an emotion that is attached to anything when we're born. You can just, it depends on the setting. Okay. Well, that was interesting. We could go on to the next chapter, the last chapter of the book, or we could discuss more. I think we'll go on to the last chapter, and hopefully have several hundred psychologists here next time that will educate us.
I'll do
All
my best.
Okay. Yeah. All right. So this is the last chapter, The Origin of Societies. The book is on the origin of societies. This is the origin of societies, sort of a summation of the whole thing, to the extent that as far as I've gotten. Okay.
The origin of societies. Cultural preens are to societies what genetic preens are to species. In the latter case, Darwin has described the process of variation and natural selection which results in changes in a species' genetic preen set. It is the accumulation of these changes over time that eventually gives rise to new species. The same can be said for societies. For example, we have seen that the cultural preen sets of some societies are constantly undergoing changes caused by the exercise of mutational power. Most of these changes are so small we don't take note of them. For example, when a new law is created regarding the use of chemicals in paint. But, on occasion, these changes are quite dramatic. For example, when Octavius modified the cultural preen set of Roman society to change it from a republic to an empire. It is the accumulation of these changes over time that eventually gives rise to new societies. However, as Darwin was aware, there is probably no precise way to define when a species has changed enough that a new species has emerged. Indeed, Darwin went further. He asserted that there is probably no precise way to define what a species is.
Yes, and we're going to read Darwin's quote on this. And the use of the term species, or the use of the term society, as in the Escherichia E. coli, as a species, or America as a society, is just an approximation to what's really going on, and really doesn't make a lot of sense and has no very good definition. So here's what Darwin had to say about it.
It is really laughable to see what different ideas are prominent in various naturalists' minds when they speak of species. In some resemblance is everything and descent of little weight, in some resemblance seems to go for nothing and creation the reigning idea, in some descent the key, in some sterility an unfailing test, with others not worth a farthing. It all comes, I believe, from trying to define the undefinable.
So Darwin recognized that there was no real way to define a species. And there's no real way, I think, precise way to define what a society is.
I suspect that Darwin was correct, and that his ideas extend to the origins of societies. We cannot obtain a precise definition of a society or when the changes in a society have given rise to a new society. Are the pre-war and post-war Japanese societies merely varieties of a more universal concept of Japanese society, or is the post-war society an entirely new society and the pre-war society extinct?
Right. How do you answer that question? If you've got a good answer that is compelling, might be worth hearing, right? There was pre-war and post-war Japanese societies. Were they different societies in the sense of different species? Or were they just variants of some grander concept of Japanese society? There's no way to answer that question. Okay.
There is archaeological evidence that Rome has been continuously inhabited since about 800 BCE. Was the Roman society of that time a different one than the Roman society of Augustus's time, or were they the same society, but the availability of written and archaeological records so limited that we can no longer detect the missing links that demonstrate the gradual morphing of one into the other?
Again, where do you draw the line that a society has changed enough that you think it's a different society? Okay. I don't think we can.
In the end, what matters most is to understand the laws that govern how and why evolution occurs in living things in human societies.
So that's it for the evolution of societies. Okay, so let's have a little discussion, and then we'll go to a break for almost 2 weeks. And when we come back, we'll start looking through DTD. Okay, any remarks or directions for a little discussion? Anybody got issues that they want to discuss at this point? Okay. Anybody got questions on their term projects that they want to discuss?
Professor, I think I'm talking too much, but sorry. But
No. Hey, John, I really like what you have to say, and I wish others would talk more.
I wanted to bring an example to the hypothesis with the repertoire of emotions that I think would be useful just to work through it to see how the example would fit the model. And the example is, so I read not too long ago that, with technology today and social media and phones, teenagers are less they don't have as much capacity to feel boredom, for example, as they did before. To feel boredom, right? As they did before these technologies emerged. So, when the idea is when a teenager gets bored, they will go to their phone, or they'll get jittery and not allow that emotion to fully develop its natural course. And when we were talking about repertoire of emotions, this example just popped into my head, and I was wondering if we could work it out, what might be happening. So boredom would be, I guess, an emotion in the repertoire of emotions, right? And
I think it well could be, yes.
and um, and so what is going on? So maybe other dreams are affecting the capacity for this emotion to rise, maybe?
Well, let's mumble about it. Okay. Here's something that I have to say about it. Um, the reason I don't think it's likely to be the correct characterization that they've lost the ability to feel boredom. Rather, I would think they still have that ability like anybody else. However, they're just not bored. And so, of course, they don't express or, give evidence or complain about boredom. Yes. I mean, uh, uh, I doubt if many soldiers in the midst of a battle have lost the capacity to be bored. They're just not bored, right?
Right, but I
Yeah.
think the point of what I read was more that whenever they start to feel bored, the teenagers would also feel anxious and then try to avoid the feeling of boredom by distracting themselves more, let's say.
Yes, and I think that's understandable and I think it's an observation of what really happens. And I think we all do that. Um, I find in myself uh, uh, boredom has been a problem for me lot in my life, being bored. And I have some ideas about it. But um, but I think boredom is a negative emotion. We don't like feeling bored. And like most negative emotions, we avoid situations that most negative emotions, we avoid situations that provoke those emotions. Uh, and very often, the way we do that is by seeking distraction. So if I'm bored, I might go watch television, watch a movie. I might listen to music, right? I might do any number of things, call a friend. I don't know what it'd be. But I think distraction is just the reasonable response to a negative emotion that you have. It's not good for you. I mean, we don't like feeling bored. And so we try to avoid it. And we do things that will unboard us and often as distractions. Yes. So I don't think it's so very complicated. Let me throw something out, and I'd like to. Oh, I'm sorry, Anthony. Carry on,
Um,
Anthony. Sorry.
I was just gonna like I kind of have two questions slash remarks.
Mhm.
It's open discussion, right?
Yes, yes, yes.
Okay, okay.
It's always open discussion, Anthony.
Okay, okay.
Anytime. Okay, yeah.
So I have two questions. Um, or remarks. So I've been thinking about the thing you said, like our emotions hereditary or something, or what'd you say about that? What was the question about that?
The thing is, I propose that we have a repertoire of emotions when we're born.
Okay.
That is a sort of uh, and this repertoire gives rise to all the possible emotional feelings we can ever experience. But that, as what I find an interesting possibility is those emotions have no target. it's almost like they're bullets, but you have nothing, and you have a gun, but you don't know what you're going to shoot at until you're born. Okay. And so it's that idea. Does
Okay.
that allow you to, yeah, go on, Anthony.
So I was thinking about that. So wouldn't you say like depression is kind of hereditary in a way? Like you won't be able to, like, you don't have to learn or like observe from other people how to be depressed, because I feel like, I don't know, I guess that you can like genetically be depressed, and
Yeah,
I don't know how to say it.
I like it, Anthony. So it's a very good issue. Uh, I suspect that Justine will uh, support me on this, that depression has a genetic component because it occurs in families. We think it does. Is that correct, Justin?
Yes, definitely. Depression can be genetically predisposed, but then it's also the whole, yeah, like nature versus nurture and how you manage it and work through it.
Yes. And so uh right. So I think depression, if we consider it an emotional state, um, we may all pretty much have the capacity to feel depression when certain events happen. Or yes, I think that happens. Um, there does seem to be a genetic component in our likelihood of feeling depression. I suspect that the repertoires, I've always been sort of implicitly assuming that the repertoire of emotions that we all are born with is pretty much the same.
I feel like
I
it can
mean, there
kind
may,
of, sorry.
yeah, no, well, you go
I,
ahead.
I think it can be boiled down to the fact where like especially like asthma and like other like health conditions can be genetic.
Yes.
But then so Justine and I are twins, and I had asthma growing up. She did not have asthma. Like she's never been diagnosed with asthma. And then
Hmm.
I like developed depression, but then as far as I know, she's been doing okay. But yeah, I've been on like antidepressants for like 4 years now or something. It's like helped me out a
Hmm.
lot, you know? So just things like that
Yes.
that are, it could be almost as simple as that comparison, you know?
Maybe if I
Yes.
get what you're saying, it's that the repertoire of emotions maybe start the same or could be the same across everyone, but maybe it's the strength or the persistence of emotion that like changes, and some have stronger depression or some people have stronger anger or other emotions, and it's that the levels of intensity that are different.
Yeah, yeah. And that sort of idea makes sense to me. There are variations. So in the sense that our behavioral repertoire, you know, doesn't allow us to fly. We don't have the muscles, the repertoire of muscles and whatever it is that makes us move, um, is, I think, basically the same for all of us. It is true that genetically, some of us have bigger muscles, uh, more flexibility in our joints, etc. So I think there are these variations in our emotional repertoire that are genetically determined, but that by and large, we all work the same way with them, and they are very similar.
Okay.
That's my perspective. Ryan.
Okay, so this sort of gets back to a previous like conversation, but we were talking about like boredom as an emotion, and we sort of just like glossed over this assumption. But I guess I'm not completely sold that boredom is an emotion, because to me it seems
Okay.
very like analogous to hunger, or like we talked about before, arousal,
Mm.
which we concluded are not emotions. Or also I think fear
Yes.
falls into this too, because all four of these things are like a hunger for something, right? So boredom is a hunger for like dopamine, fear is a hunger for safety, arousal is a hunger for reproduction, and then hunger is a hunger for food.
I think you're on to something there, and you've articulated it very well. Um, yes, so some things are more like the hunger and I guess fear in the um, and some things are not. Uh, and you're saying boredom may be one of those like hunger kind of things.
Yeah.
I think that's tenable. And you've made me uncertain about my assertion that, yeah, it seemed to be an emotion. Maybe it's not. It's a very good point. Uh, you may be right.
I think
So, yeah,
I think that's a really good point too, but not because it's a hunger for dopamine. Otherwise, we would conclude that love is a hunger for oxytocin, or the whatever hormone we feel when we.
yeah, yeah. Okay, so now you've brought up the idea of love. And now, uh, I hadn't been thinking about that much as an emotion.
Love is probably like
Um,
a hunger for connection or like association or like identity, you know, somewhere along those lines.
yeah, well, this is all good points. So maybe, and probably, we should have been considering these hunger-like responses that we feel those. I mean, you know when you're hungry. Um, okay, so and it seems to me depression, for example, or anger, or these other, well, anyway, I don't know where to draw the lines between these kind of things.
I would argue that those can easily trigger emotions though too. Like if
Oh
somebody
yeah,
is like, feeling like their dating life is going poorly and they're just really like desiring to fall in love with somebody, that's when they can get kind of um, you know,
depressed.
depressed or like, some people do respond angrily too, people will be
Yes.
like, I'm not the problem, you're the problem. I'm breaking up with you kind of stuff. So it's kind of
Yes. I I think these all sorts of events can trigger our emotion. Um, okay, but Ryan, oh, go ahead.
Someone in the chat mentioned, Martino mentioned drive reduction theory, and that sort of goes along with. I was gonna posit that all of these like hungers are essentially like some generalized force, and drive reduction theory is like uh, the behavior is sort of motivated by a desire to reduce these drives, these desires. So if you think of that as like an energy, then it's like sort of converging on like the lowest energy state. So I think there's some sort of like physics interpretation here.
Okay, I sort of can see that. However, uh, the drive to reproduce is not something that we want to reduce usually. Well, maybe it is. Okay,
I
I don't
mean,
know.
you reduce it
Okay,
by
yes,
certain actions.
yes, absolutely. Okay, so I think that we've managed, you know, to to end a lecture with a lot of confusion once again. And, I think we can all take pride in our ability to continuously do that. Okay, so guys, it was as usual fun, and I'm going to give the last word to Anthony. Carry on. Yes.
Okay. So would you consider consciousness a preen, a meme, or neither?
Consciousness, I address that in DTD as well. I do not consider it a preen. Uh, I I guess I consider it mostly to be just a subroutine of our brain, and it's a very interesting one, what it is and everything. Many people find it somehow, I don't know, they seem to treat it almost as if it's an untouchable, not understandable concept. That's just my experience. I don't think it's anything special. It's just the way our brains ended up getting organized. But we can get to that in DTD. All right. It was great. Thank you for joining us, Justine. And see you guys next time,
Thank
I
you.
think. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for letting me
Bye,
join.
guys. Come back again.